Hi again, Woody here, and welcome to this video, another of our Beyond Oil conversations. Now, I've asked our experts and editors here in Australia for their take on the most important aspects of Australia's transition to a low carbon economy. As investors, we should accept that clean energy is the future and start planning and positioning. Should we start planning and positioning for it now, or will fossil fuels power our economy for years to come? It's a bit of a question happening, and there's been lots of discussion about it. Well, we're going to be digging into it on your behalf during this series, and helping me do that today is Ryan Dintz from Exponential Stock Investor. Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Woody, how you going?
Yeah, good. Now, a bit of context. Back in 2017, we all know that the Tesla big battery was constructed in South Australia. This was up until very recently the largest lithium-ion battery in the world. And according to the official website, the battery has saved South Australian consumers around $150 million in the last 3 years, in the 3 years since, basically by picking up the slack when there's been high demand on the power grid. The big battery has been a big success in all by any metrics, but really this is just the beginning. Even bigger batteries are planned, and of course the technology for both generating and storing electricity is improving and getting cheaper. So will we see batteries in our basements and our garages in the near future? And what does that mean for centralized power grids across our states? So I wanted to get your thoughts on it, Ryan.
Yeah.
Now, one of the ideas you talk about in your writings in Money Morning and in your paid letters is this idea of self-sovereign energy, and what we just talked about in what I've just mentioned in South Australia is part of that trend. Can you explain what that is? Maybe let's start with that.
Yeah, so the concept of self-sovereign energy works on a number of levels. At the top level, you're looking at the sort of level of countries, and we've talked about this before, Woody, but there's a lot of impetus for individual countries to try and get off reliance on fossil fuels. You know, there's a lot of implications from relying on oil from the Middle East or gas from Russia. For example, we've just seen recently Germany and Russia are at loggerheads about a potential gas pipeline because of allegations that Vladimir Putin has poisoned one of the opposition leaders in Russia. But Germany are in a bit of a bind because they were relying on this gas pipeline from Russia. So there's been a strong impetus over the last decade for countries to become energy self-secure. So that's the top level, and that's been a big driver behind renewable energy. But even at the individual level, there's really a desire from a lot of people, I think, to have control of their own energy. I mean, everyone knows every month we get our power bills, and they seem to be going higher and higher. And what choice do you have in that equation? You've got the choice between maybe 2 or 3 monopoly industries which pretty much charge the same thing. So it's a really uncompetitive industry. And the idea of being self-sovereign, of potentially going off grid, so not being completely reliant on the grid, is something that I think appeals to a lot of consumers. And you can see that from take-up rates of stuff like solar panels in Australia. A lot of people like the idea of solar, one, because it can lower their energy costs because you're getting free energy from the sun. But two, it sort of gives them some bargaining power with these monopoly energy companies. And what you were saying before about battery technology, about being able to store renewable energies, is the key component, I think, in progressing towards this future where people do become almost eventually totally in control of their own energy, and it will be completely off grid. We're a while away from that now, but I think that's the future on where we're headed. So that's the big idea concept in my head of where we're going, and that's that concept of self-sovereign energy. Are we there yet? Of course not, but it's definitely the way the technological trend is going.
So you think so basically statewide power grids will soon be a kind of thing of the past, really. We come to see that as the norm, but
yeah, I reckon. Look, if you think, there's actually this story which I'll tell you quickly from the early 20th century. You've probably heard this before, but Nikola Tesla, who was one of the pioneers of electrical energy back in the late 19th century, and obviously who Elon Musk has named his company off more recently. But the legend has it that he'd come up with a source to tap into free or almost free energy that could be available anywhere on Earth, and that was by tapping into the abundant electrons in the Earth's crust. And apparently, he'd come up with this concept to do that. And at the time, he went to his financier, who was the billionaire J.P. Morgan, or soon-to-be billionaire J.P. Morgan, who's very famous. And he told him about this idea. And J.P. Morgan's reaction at the time was, well, where do I put the meter? How do I charge people for this? And Tesla, who was a bit more of a, not left wing, but he was more of a humanist, didn't really have an answer for that. And basically, J.P. Morgan stopped funding him, and he owned all the patents to Tesla's work. And so that idea never seen the light of day. We don't know if that idea would have worked because it didn't get that far. We don't even know if it's true. It could just be a rumor. But the idea behind that, behind big power stations wanting to make you go through them to get your energy needs, you can imagine that situation is true. That's the way energy's evolved. You have a big power station. If you need energy as a consumer or business, you have to go through that power station. And that's just been the way the whole energy market's evolved over the last 100 years. So looking forward to the next 20 years, with battery technology, suddenly that equation, for the first time in like over 100 years, has changed that dynamic. So if you're a town planner or a policymaker trying to think of, well, what power plant do we build next? Should it be a coal-fired one or a gas-powered one? Now we're at the stage where you have to take into account the possible advances in battery technology and renewable energy. And in Australia, we're seeing this play out with the complete inaction by politicians on what to do next. Because on one hand, there's a bunch of vested interests in the fossil fuel industry who are trying to eke out the last bits of dollars they can out of their assets, their coal and gas assets, before it's too late. And they have quite a lot of sway in Australia. And then the other side of the thing, you have this whole Elon Musk-led technological revolution in battery and renewable energy. And that is just getting better and cheaper. So it's sort of at this point where there will still be power plants, but you won't necessarily need to have a fossil fuel-based one. And you might be able to have micro power plant sites dotted around in a wider area. And that leads eventually down the line to the concept of people having their own power plants in their own house. No, that's a while away, but that is the progression that I think we're going down.
But that's basically the idea of that's what decentralization of the energy markets looks like.
Yeah.
And it kind of does seem really archaic to have one power grid that basically powers, I don't know if it's statewide or whatever, but it just seems so archaic now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But it's hard to picture because that's a kind of abstract term, the decentral. You kind of know what it means in politics, but what does it actually mean in the energy markets? And that kind of is what it means, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, exactly. And that's why renewables, if you think about solar energy, for example, that is, the sun is basically just one massive nuclear reactor that is sending us free energy every day. Now, the only reason we don't use that energy is because the problem was, well, as long as the sun is shining, then you've got an energy source. But, cloudy days, or if you live in Scotland, where I'm from, maybe you never see the sun.
Twice a year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the key has always been, well, how do you store it in the good times and then use that energy in the bad times? And that comes down to basically battery technology. And that is the thing which you probably say, batteries have been with us for 200 years in some form or another. But the impetus to really take us to the next level has probably only been over the past decade. And that's Elon Musk basically set this trend off, because he said, we're going to make electric cars a reality. And to do that, you need to create an electric battery which can charge, which can run a car. And he started this whole mass of money coming into lithium-ion battery research. And like any scientific thing, it takes time for that to evolve. But where we were 10 years ago on lithium-ion batteries and where we are now is so much, we're so much more advanced. And from a cost perspective, I think lithium-ion batteries today cost about 85% less than they did 10 years ago. But even today, with electric cars, I think the price of a Tesla S, around a third of that cost is batteries, is the battery. So as you know, with any technology, you know we've experienced that the cost comes down over time as we get better at doing it, and that trend is going to first hit the car industry. You know, it seems pretty obvious now that the move to electric cars is going to come. That wasn't so obvious even 4 or 5 years ago, but now it seems that's pretty obvious. In a way, that's the Trojan horse for the whole battery industry, because that technology that we're learning from electric cars then becomes the battery technology that helps power plants move to renewables and then store energy that way. And then we'll see that technology advance further to allow people to, their solar panels will become better, the batteries will become smaller and more powerful, like we've seen happen with computers. And eventually we're going to get to that stage. I don't know what the timeline is, but I think we'll get to that stage where we won't necessarily need to be on the grid at all, especially as households, maybe as businesses as well. So I think that's the trend. And if the last 50 years has taught us anything, is that technology only moves one way. It only gets better. And the amount of money and impetus behind battery technology now is, in my opinion, unstoppable.
Why is there such a battle against that trend then? Because do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to agree. I'm pretty optimistic when it comes to tech, and I totally agree. In general, it always makes life better, but there's always a bit of resistance.
Yeah.
Why
so
is that?
the resistance is probably obvious on two levels. One is you've always got vested interests who you're displacing. So the whole disruption thing. And like I said, power plant decisions that are made now last for 2 decades. So if you've got a coal mine or a gas source, and you can see this future like we can, and that that's going to be worth nothing, you're trying to get policymakers to make decisions now to at least lock in maybe a couple more decades worth of cash from that asset. So that's the sort of political resistance to this, and that sort of ties into the fact that these things are always a curve. So if you moved straight to renewables now and straight to battery technology, the fact is it wouldn't be good enough to.
But yeah, because the I don't want to say the power grids, but they can't store enough.
The base load power that we need now, renewables aren't there yet. And so, I think we've seen power blackouts in states like California recently and things like that. And that's maybe over-reliance on renewables too soon. So there's always that tension between, well, when is the technology going to be good enough to completely displace that, and how long that's going to take. And as an economy, that's a difficult thing to judge, because you can't just say, oh well, we're going to cop not enough energy for the next 5 years as we make that transition, because that's going to cost billions and billions of dollars for businesses and for the economy. So it's very hard navigating that transition period. But I think if you look at most major economies, like in Europe and even in Australia and in America, that transition is happening, and it's happening state by state level in some cases where they are moving to renewables. I think in a state, I may have said this to you before, but a state like Texas in America, who's definitely not a lefty greeny state, they've went with wind power for most of their new power stations over coal. So, and they're only doing that because of coal to hard cash, because it's cheaper. So we're already reached the tipping point in some technologies in some areas in terms of costs. And my theory is, and this is just based on nothing too scientific, but just the experience of technology, is that cost benefit analysis is only going to get better and better and better. And so I think at some point it will be obvious to everyone that renewables and battery tech is the way to go. It just depends how long that takes us.
In that sense, it's the market doing its work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not something. It's really weird when you think about it, because you can't really plan. The concept of having a centralized body, whether that be a government, policymakers planning a decentralized energy. So it's just a kind of a weird.
I love the whole, this is probably a bit beyond energy markets, but I love this whole concept of decentralization. Like me and you have talked about cryptocurrencies before, and the essence of that is you're taking the power off the monopoly creators of money, and you're diffusing that to me and you, which is, I love that idea. And this is the same for energy markets. You're taking the monopoly power of, but let's be honest, the monopoly providers of energy, they are profit maximizers. they're sort of capitalists in the sense of for themselves, but they exist in a monopoly industry. So they're just cash cows for a certain group of people. And I'm a free market capitalist. I believe in free markets, and part of that is as well, if you can decentralize something, do it. If we can, if collectively we can bring energy costs down, and there's not just the cost aspect. There's also the fact that why do we live in cities that are planned around hubs of expensive property? If you can decentralize life, and that includes energy, then maybe there's scope for people to live in different areas and bring down housing costs and other things like that. So there's a whole lot of knock-on effects of decentralization I like, but money and energy are the two big ones that I really like to follow.
Where on the curve are we? Like take battery technology. Where are we? We kind of know what smart batteries aren't capable of now, and we kind of know what the potential is and what it could mean. So we just talked about that, how to decentralize it. But where are we in your view on that curve? Or is it hard to tell?
It's a tricky one. I honestly don't know, to be honest. I think we're not as close as maybe some people were saying. I think you probably say if you look at it in terms of electric cars, you're maybe like still 4 or 5 years away from electric cars like becoming the dominant type of car. So, and electric cars are obviously the low-hanging fruit in terms of battery technology, the market leader. So if you're maybe 4 or 5 years in terms of electric cars really ramping up as a percentage of the car market, then within the next decade, you'll probably see that transition into power plants. But it could be quicker. That's the thing about technology. Sometimes you underestimate it and things can happen really fast. There can be a tipping point that's reached. And there is so much research going into this stuff that you could find adoption rates are a lot faster than that. But I think from my reading, people do think the transition will be, a decade or so.
Do you reckon it's like in terms of, you can kind of see it, at what point does the parity cost of battery storage with coal-fired, when it tips like that, it will suddenly start moving exponentially, right?
I think that. I think the history of disruption shows you that. When you see, if you've ever looked at a curve of digital camera sales to the old Kodak cameras, you just see this little tipping point, and suddenly the sales of Kodak go off a cliff, and on the reverse side, the digital cameras go like that. So there is this tipping point, and it's always easy to see in hindsight. It's harder to see in the moment.
Yeah. One of our colleagues, Tom Mayer, who's he's the algo builder that we work with. He always says, the left side of the chart, everyone's an expert. The right side, you never really know.
It's the hard right-hand side, exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the implications. So we kind of discussed where timeframes, touched on timeframes in a way, but let's talk about, obviously we talk about the investment side of things. So what are the implications for investors in all this? Because although the time to really start moving, the time to have bought Microsoft, I know it's a bit of a cheesy thing, is not when everyone has a PC in their bedroom, in their kitchen and workplace. It's before that happens. So is this the time now that investors should be really looking into this area?
Yeah, look, Australian investors are lucky in a way, in the sense that we have a plethora of opportunities in specifically the battery metals space. So, we're not really market leaders in the actual battery technology or the manufacturing side of stuff, but being lucky in the sense that we do have all these resources in the grounds, and a few of them are going to be key components in the batteries of the future. So just to give you a few, there's obviously lithium, which is the one we talked about. Now, lithium is sort of following that normal adoption curve, where in 2015, the value of a lot of lithium companies went nuts. This was on the back of Tesla, which was on the rise at the time. And this was like the early stage of a new technology coming. And then you had that period of a correction, probably from like 2017 to roughly now, where they realized that people's expectations, the hype had got ahead of the reality, as it were. So you had that curve down. But right now, I'm starting to see some lithium mining stocks begin that sort of, they call it the crossing the chasm to early adoption again. So it's sort of that old Gartner hype cycle curve, which people might have seen. So lithium, I think, is a really good one to start looking at right now.
Right. And we know what lithium did in 2006. I think it was early 2016.
2015 to 2017, it went
Yeah.
nuts. There was a few trades I remember getting on, like Galaxy Resources, like at 5 cents, and it went up to above $2. And there's a whole bunch of them: Altura Mining, Pilbara Minerals. So lithium is a one I'm looking at right now in terms of, is it now investable? It's definitely tradable. Like in one of my trading services, we've got a few trades on, but is it now that tipping point, like we were talking about before, where you start taking a position and building an investment? The other really interesting one, which I really like right now, is copper, which, old-fashioned copper. Like,
Yeah, you wouldn't think that's part of the.
I like copper because in terms of its leverage to renewable technology and electric cars, it's immense. Like there's about 4 times as much copper in an electric car as there is in an internal combustion car. I read some stats recently that said, there's 2,000 tons per gigawatt of power generated, 2,000 tons of copper used in wind power, and 5,000 tons of copper needed per gigawatt in solar power. And that's like magnitudes more than is used in a typical power station. So copper's got this natural leverage to both electric cars and to renewable energy. And then there's also the fact with copper that it's also leveraged to the whole infrastructure side of things, which, we could see a bit of an infrastructure boom as countries try to spend their way out of the economic turmoil we're potentially in at the moment. So copper is a really interesting one, both from the energy point of view, but also just the general economy. And then there's your more specialty sort of metals like nickel, which plays a role in electric car batteries at the moment. Elon Musk recently said that if a nickel mine that could be done sustainably and ethically, he would buy all the nickel supply in a heartbeat. So he's obviously trying to ramp up producers of nickel because he knows he's going to need that in the future. And then there's stuff like cobalt and graphene, which are probably not going to be on this first wave of battery technology, but they are like the next stage of battery technology. So like what happened with lithium in 2015, you might get a decent bump in them as people start to realize that's the future of battery technology, like what happened with lithium ion. Of course, you'd probably want to take some profits on those ones on the way because you might get the retrace.
And these are all resources which are abundant in
all resources. That's the beauty of it. I mean, copper is fantastic. Lithium, we've got, apart from maybe Argentina or some parts of South America, have some decent lithium, but Chile has some copper as well. But Australia is like, a reliable partner in these things, especially. And the other one I was going to touch upon was rare earths, is specifically permanent magnets, which are a key component in a lot of wind turbines and things like that. And if you look at the tensions between the US and China right now, Australia as a secure partner in sourcing that type of material is important. At the moment, a lot of these rare earths come from China, and that could be an issue. So Australia's got some compelling natural advantages in the resources space for investors to look at. I kind of wish we used our tech know-how more and maybe went up the value chain a little bit more and developed our own battery makers. I mean, there should be no reason why we couldn't be leaders in solar technology and battery technology ourselves. We've got the brain power, but unfortunately Australia doesn't seem to be going that way. There's not too many battery manufacturers on the ASX I can think of which are worth looking at, but we've definitely got huge opportunities in the resources space, which is really exciting.
And what about, I wanted to ask you, Ryan, because you're one of the of our team that's quite bullish on uranium as well.
Yeah, and so it's funny.
Does that fit into the because it's clean energy, right? I mean,
well, the way I see uranium is that it comes back to this countrywide level of self-sovereignty. So if that transition period from fossil fuels to the next stage of energy is more than 10 years, then countries that don't want to invest in fossil fuel power plants need to think of a transition. And uranium is, one, it's powerful enough for baseload needs, so it works for the economy. Two, a lot of people don't know this, but it's actually a technology play as well. A lot of the new nuclear reactors are small modular plants. They're not the big, like in The Simpsons, the big nuclear plants with the three-eyed fish in the river. Yeah. there are these small nuclear modular plants which use, a really next generation form of nuclear fuel. And there are obviously some issues you have to think about with uranium. How do you dispose of it and the safety and stuff like that. But I think it's almost a technology play as well. And like I said before, the sun's one big nuclear reactor, so we shouldn't let any prejudices make us discount it completely. And the fact is, it can do the job. We know it can do the job. So whereas the timeline for renewables is a little bit more uncertain, how is the batteries going to get cost effective enough and efficient enough to do the job? We pretty much know that uranium can do the job. It's been around for 50, 60, 70 years. So I think that could be a good transition energy source for countries that want to have that self-sovereignty, have that self-reliance, but also move away from fossil fuels. But like all these things, it comes down to that equation of what's the costs of it, the timing, and does it do the job? And that is that's why there's so many opinions in this space, I think, because no one knows the answers to that 100%. As an investor, that's why there's huge opportunities as well, though. When there's a flux, when everything's obvious, the opportunity's gone. When the future's uncertain, that's where, if you can think about this a little bit, you can make some decent money.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're kind of getting this, all of our minds together on this idea. It was actually when a couple of months ago when I wrote about this in the Insider, it was one topic that really generated a ton of interest from readers. I think we had like 40 emails.
Yeah.
So it can be a very polarizing issue. It's a very political issue, but the fact is technological trends are happening. And it's an area that you really need to explore. What wouldn't you say?
Oh, 100% agree. I think that's what's exciting about it. I mean, for the last 100 years, before 2010, energy was energy. It
has implications for the dollar as well, for money too.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about that in the past, where taking oil out of the equation changes the reliance on the petrodollar system that's operated since the 1970s. So again, in my opinion, that's exciting for another aspect of decentralization, which is cryptocurrencies. Mm-hmm. Could be interesting for gold as well. People have opinions on that as well. And that's the thing. No one knows the future. That's why you have these opinions and in this flux. And the key to, as an investor, I suppose, is to look at it all, follow it. Don't necessarily set your opinions in stone either. Be flexible to new information. Mm. But when you do see an opportunity, and if you do see a good opportunity, and you get into it early enough, that is, when these things transition, when industries transition from one thing to the next, that is when, the big money is made, if you can spot that transition before anyone else. And that's obviously, like we said, that's the hard right-hand side of the chart where no one knows the future. So yeah, it's exciting though. It's the
most exciting side of the chart too. So
exactly, yeah. And I love things like this. I hate monopoly industries that don't change. I think living in a world of changes is exciting. It's as an investor that wants to use their brain, that's what you want. Gone are the days for investors where you can just buy an annuity that's going to pay you 8% a year and just rely on that working out for you. Interest rates in banks are nothing. So how do you set yourself up for retirement, or how do you create an income stream? You've got to start thinking of new ways of doing that. And what could be better than finding out what the future of energy is going to be and finding a way of creating some sort of income stream for you off of that. It's pretty exciting.
Well, it is exciting. Thanks, mate. So that was really interesting. And I think, people are beginning to see how close we are to making that transition to clean power and these new technologies. As we've already mentioned, the accompanying, what you just said, the transfer of wealth is exciting, and it could be potentially colossal. So thanks, Ryan, mate, for sharing your thoughts today. And to everyone watching at home, thanks again for your company today. I'm going to bring you more of these Beyond Oil conversations over the coming days so that you can start to get a picture of the best places to invest, and more importantly, and when. So I'll see you again very soon. Thank you.